The wind howled across Cedar Bay's shoreline that December morning in 1986. Fisherman Donovan Riley trudged through wet sand, his weathered boots sinking with each step. The storm had churned up the waters overnight, leaving the beach strewn with driftwood and broken shells. As dawn broke through charcoal clouds, something caught his eye. A corner of dark leather protruding from the sand. Donovan knelt down, calloused fingers brushing away the wet grains, to reveal what appeared to be a book. Not just any book. A Bible. Its pages fluttered in the bitter wind as he lifted it from its sandy grave. The leather cover, once pristine, now bore the scars of salt and time. A name was inscribed on the inside cover, the handwriting steady and bold. Pastor Amara Bell. Donovan's hands trembled. Everyone in Cedar Bay knew that name. Everyone knew she'd vanished without a trace 3 months earlier. Cedar Bay, Mississippi, wasn't just another dot on the Gulf Coast map. It was a town divided by railroad tracks that separated wealth from want, power from poverty. Spanish moss hung from ancient oaks like nature's own curtains, concealing generations of secrets. The air always carried the scent of salt and magnolias, of fish markets and Friday night catfish fries. In 1986, the wounds of segregation were still fresh, covered by bandages of forced politeness and unspoken boundaries. The town operated on a delicate balance, wealthy white families in their columned homes overlooking the water, working-class black families in the neighborhoods that tourists never visited. Churches stood on every other corner, their steeples reaching skyward like fingers pointing to salvation. Religion was the heartbeat of Cedar Bay, though not everyone's heart beat to the same rhythm. Within this complex tapestry of Southern life, Pastor Amara Bell had been a singular thread. At 36, she commanded respect through her unwavering voice and penetrating gaze. Her slight frame belied the power she wielded from the pulpit of Cedar Bay Community Church. Unlike the grand white churches downtown, hers was a modest building with mismatched pews and a roof that leaked during heavy rains. But every Sunday, it overflowed with those seeking more than just words. They came for truth. Amara didn't just preach gospel, she lived it. Her hands bore calluses from building homes with Habitat for Humanity. Her voice grew hoarse from speaking at town meetings about unequal school funding. Her eyes carried shadows from late nights counseling addicts and abused women. In a town where many black women remained invisible, Amara refused to be unseen. On September 15, 1986, as evening descended on Cedar Bay, congregants gathered on the worn wooden steps of the church. The night air carried a surprising chill for early fall, prompting members to huddle closer together, sharing warmth and whispered conversations. Inside, choir members arranged themselves in the first 2 rows, hymnals open to Amazing Grace, Amara's traditional opening song. 6 o'clock came and went. The pianist played the introduction twice, eyes darting nervously to the side door where Amara always entered. By 6:30, murmurs rippled through the congregation. By 7 o'clock, Deacon Wallace Phillips stood before the confused crowd, his voice cracking as he announced that service would be postponed. "Pastor Amara has never missed a service," he said, his weathered hands gripping the pulpit. "Something isn't right." That night, the church emptied into the streets, members splitting into groups to check Amara's small cottage, the shelter where she volunteered, the hospital. Their flashlight beams cut through darkness, voices calling a name that received no answer. By midnight, the search parties returned to the church steps, faces drawn with worry. Amara Bell, the woman who had never failed them, was gone. No one knew then that her disappearance would unravel the carefully constructed facade of Cedar Bay, exposing the rot beneath its picturesque surface. Hey there, true crime sleuths. If this is your first time with us at Last Seen Stories, we investigate the mysteries others have forgotten. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit subscribe to join our community. We're diving deep into a case that's haunted the Mississippi Gulf Coast for decades. A story of faith, power, and a Bible that surfaced from the sand with more questions than answers. Amara Bell wasn't born to be a pastor. In fact, everything about her early life suggested she'd follow a different path entirely. Born in 1950 to sharecroppers in rural Mississippi, Amara grew up picking cotton alongside her parents, her small fingers bleeding from the sharp bowls. Education was a luxury, but Amara's mother, Josephine, insisted her daughter attend school whenever possible. "My mama used to say, they can take our land, our money, even our dignity, but they can't take what's in your head," Amara told the Cedar Bay Gazette in a 1985 interview. "She'd walk me to school in the rain, in the cold, didn't matter. Said my brain was my ticket out." That ticket took her to Jackson State University on a partial scholarship in 1968, where she studied education during one of the most turbulent periods in American history. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. occurred during her freshman year, igniting something within her that would never be extinguished. "I thought I'd be a school teacher," Amara's college roommate, Denise Washington, recalled years later. But after King died, something changed in her. She started attending every civil rights meeting, every protest. She'd come back to our dorm room with her voice gone from shouting, but her eyes, they were on fire. It was at a campus prayer vigil that Amara first felt what she later described as the call. Standing among hundreds of grieving students, she suddenly stepped forward and began to speak. No one had asked her to. No one expected it. But the words flowed through her with such force and clarity that the crowd fell silent. "I never planned to speak that night," she wrote in her journal, which was recovered from her home after her disappearance. "It was like someone else was using my voice. I knew then that God had plans for me that were bigger than anything I could imagine." The road to becoming a female pastor in the 1970s, especially a black female pastor in the Deep South, was lined with obstacles. Many denominations flatly refused to ordain women, others relegated them to children's ministries or missionary work. But Amara was undeterred. She enrolled in seminary in Atlanta in 1972, often being the only woman, and certainly the only black woman, in her classes. Male professors ignored her raised hand. Fellow students left empty seats beside her. Anonymous notes appeared in her mailbox, quoting scripture about women remaining silent in church. Amara kept every one of those notes in a box she labeled Fuel. In 1977, with her divinity degree in hand, but no church willing to hire her, Amara returned to Mississippi. She found Cedar Bay by accident. Her car broke down on Highway 90, and she wandered into town looking for a mechanic. What she found instead was a community in desperate need of spiritual leadership. The Cedar Bay Community Church had been without a pastor for nearly 2 years. The congregation had dwindled to just 37 members, mostly elderly women and a handful of families. The building itself was falling apart, broken windows covered with plastic sheets, termite damage weakening the floors, hymnals so old the pages crumbled when turned. "When I first saw that church, I laughed," Amara once told a local reporter. "Then I cried. Then I rolled up my sleeves." The congregation was initially skeptical of this young woman who spoke of being their spiritual leader. But Amara didn't ask for permission. She simply showed up one Sunday, stepped behind the rickety pulpit, and delivered a sermon so powerful that 3 visitors were baptized that very day. By 1980, the congregation had quadrupled in size. What made Amara's church unique in Cedar Bay was its diversity. Though predominantly black, the pews also held white families, Hispanic migrant workers, Vietnamese fishermen who had settled in the area after the war. In a town where Sunday morning remained the most segregated hour of the week, Amara's congregation stood out as a vibrant exception. "She didn't preach about heaven as some far-off reward," said Thomas Garner, a longtime deacon. "She preached about creating heaven right here, right now, through how we treat each other." Under Amara's leadership, the church became more than a place of worship. It was a community center, a food bank, a meeting place for addiction recovery groups. When Hurricane Elena devastated the coast in 1985, the church gymnasium became an emergency shelter, with Amara coordinating relief efforts that crossed racial and economic lines. But it was her social justice work that truly distinguished her ministry and potentially marked her for danger. Amara never shied away from confronting Cedar Bay's power structures. She led voter registration drives in black neighborhoods. She organized protests when the town council attempted to cut funding for the predominantly black public schools. She publicly criticized police harassment of young black men. "Pastor Bell wasn't just talking about Jesus feeding the 5,000, said Loretta Watkins, a church member. She was asking why people in our own community were going hungry while others had more than enough. In early 1986, Amara launched her most ambitious and controversial project yet. For years, a dilapidated building on the edge of town had served as an unofficial shelter for women fleeing domestic violence. With no funding or official status, it operated on donations and volunteers, often sending women away for lack of space. Amara proposed converting the old Jefferson Hotel, a once grand building that had fallen into disrepair, into a proper women's shelter with counseling services, job training, and transitional housing. The building was owned by the city, which had been trying to sell it to developers for years without success. "This is a chance for Cedar Bay to show what we truly value," Amara told the town council in May 1986. "Do we value property and profit, or do we value the lives of women and children who have nowhere else to turn?" The council voted 4-3 to lease the building to Amara's church for $1 per year. The deciding vote came from Councilman Reginald Foster, a recent addition to the council and the only black member. The backlash was immediate and fierce. "I've never seen such hatred directed at someone who was just trying to help others," said Louise Bryant, Amara's assistant at the church. People who'd never even spoken to Pastor Amara were suddenly calling her a communist, a radical, a threat to property values. What Amara didn't know, what few people knew, was that Mayor Richard Whitfield and his brother-in-law, construction magnate Warren Prescott, had already drafted plans to demolish the Jefferson Hotel and build luxury condominiums. The council's decision delayed those plans indefinitely. In the 3 months before her disappearance, Amara received dozens of threatening phone calls. Twice, she found her car tires slashed. Once, a brick was thrown through her kitchen window with a note that read simply, "Stop." Amara reported each incident to the police. No arrests were ever made. "I asked her if she was scared," Thomas Garner recalled. "She just quoted scripture, 'What can man do to me?' But I saw it in her eyes. She knew she'd made powerful enemies." On September 10, 1986, 5 days before she vanished, Amara wrote in her journal, "The shelter opens next month. God's timing, not theirs. I feel the pressure building, but I won't bend. Some battles are worth any cost." September 15th began like any other Monday for Pastor Amara Bell. She rose at 5 a.m., as confirmed by the analog alarm clock found still set to that time in her bedroom. Her morning devotional book was open on her kitchen table, a half-finished cup of coffee beside it. According to her journal, Mondays were dedicated to administrative work and sermon preparation. Amara's neighbor, Ruth Thompson, reported seeing her at approximately 7:30 a.m., collecting her mail from the box at the end of her driveway. "She waved at me like always," Ruth told police, said something about the weather turning cooler. Nothing seemed off. At 9:15 a.m., Amara placed a call to Louise Bryant, her church assistant, asking her to reschedule a meeting with the shelter's volunteer coordinator. The call lasted 3 minutes. Louise would later describe Amara as sounding perfectly normal, maybe a little tired. At 10:30 a.m., Amara was spotted at Cedar Bay Savings and Loan by bank teller Victor Nolan. She deposited a church donation check and withdrew $200 in cash. According to Nolan, she mentioned needing supplies for that evening's service. Security camera footage from Harrison's hardware store showed Amara purchasing light bulbs, extension cords, and a new padlock at 11:45 a.m. She paid in cash and left with her purchases in a paper bag. After that, the timeline becomes murky. A receipt found in her purse showed she bought lunch at Marjorie's Diner at 1:03 p.m., a BLT sandwich and iced tea. The waitress didn't remember serving her, but the restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd. Amara's car, a 1978 blue Chevrolet Impala, was found in the church parking lot. Inside were the hardware store purchases still in their bag. Her Bible, not the one later found on the beach, but her teaching Bible, with multicolored tabs and extensive margin notes, was on the passenger seat. Her house keys were in the ignition, and then nothing. No confirmed sightings, no phone calls made or received, no transactions on her bank cards. Pastor Amara Bell had vanished as completely as if she'd been erased from the world. When Amara failed to appear for the evening service, panic spread quickly through her congregation. Deacon Phillips immediately called the police from the church office phone. Officer Benjamin Drake responded to the call but seemed unconcerned. The officer kept saying adults have the right to go wherever they want, Phillips recalled. Said we needed to wait 24 hours before filing a missing persons report. I told him Amara wouldn't just disappear without telling anyone, especially not before a service. He wrote something in his notebook and left. The congregation didn't wait for official permission. They formed search parties that spread throughout Cedar Bay, checking every location Amara frequented: the library, the hospital waiting room where she often counseled families, the park where she took her morning walks. By midnight, over 100 people had joined the search, their flashlight beams crisscrossing the small town. White community members largely stayed away, watching from porches as the search unfolded. It felt like two different towns that night, said Marcus Jenkins, a teenager at the time. Our half of Cedar Bay was awake, searching, praying. The other half just watched, like it was some TV show that didn't concern them. The official missing persons report wasn't filed until 10 a.m. the next day, nearly 16 hours after Amara was reported missing. The delay would later become a point of bitter contention between the black community and local law enforcement. Cedar Bay Police Chief Douglas Harper assigned 2 officers to the case: Benjamin Drake, who had responded to the initial call, and Detective Sandra Michaels, one of only 3 female officers on the force. Their preliminary report noted no signs of struggle at either the church or Amara's home. They classified her disappearance as voluntary absence rather than possible abduction. They didn't dust for fingerprints, said Louise Bryant. They didn't tape off the church as a crime scene. They kept saying she probably just decided to take a break, maybe visit family out of state. It was like they weren't even trying. This perception was reinforced when 3 days into the investigation, Officer Drake was overheard at the local diner saying, "All this fuss over a woman who probably just ran off with some man." When confronted about this comment by Amara's congregation members, Chief Harper defended his officer but reassigned him to traffic duty, putting Detective Michaels in charge of the investigation. Michaels, though more sympathetic, was hampered by department procedures and limited resources. The Cedar Bay Police Department had never handled a missing persons case involving a prominent community member. Their protocols were outdated, their forensic capabilities limited to fingerprinting and basic evidence collection. As days stretched into weeks, several theories emerged about Amara's disappearance. Theory 1. Amara had left voluntarily, perhaps overwhelmed by threats and pressure. This was the prevailing theory among law enforcement, but was vehemently rejected by those who knew her. Theory 2. Amara had been abducted by someone opposed to her work, possibly connected to the shelter project. This theory gained traction among her supporters, but lacked physical evidence. Theory 3. Amara had met with an accident. Perhaps her car had been stolen with her in it, or she'd been offered a ride by someone who then harmed her. The presence of her car at the church complicated this theory. Theory 4. Amara had taken her own life due to undisclosed personal problems. This theory, floated by Mayor Whitfield in a press conference, caused outrage in the black community. "Pastor Amara? Suicide?" Louise Bryant said, tears streaming down her face. "The woman who counseled others out of taking their lives? Who preached hope every Sunday? That's not just wrong, it's slander." By mid-October, national civil rights organizations had taken notice of the case. The NAACP sent representatives to Cedar Bay, holding press conferences that criticized the handling of the investigation. They pointed to a disturbing pattern across the South: crimes against black community leaders being inadequately investigated, perpetrators rarely brought to justice. The increased scrutiny forced Cedar Bay police to expand their investigation, but by then, crucial time had been lost. Security camera footage had been recorded over. Potential witnesses had left town. The trail, never warm to begin with, had gone completely cold. On October 30th, the case was officially classified as a long-term missing persons investigation. In practical terms, this meant active daily investigation would cease, with periodic reviews scheduled every 30 days. For Amara's congregation, for the women who had pinned their hopes on the shelter, for the community she had fought to improve, the reclassification felt like abandonment, like giving up. They didn't know then that the most shocking development in the case was still to come. This investigation took some unexpected turns. Hit the like button if you're captivated by this case. It helps more people discover this story. And make sure you're subscribed for the rest of this tragic mystery. December 17, 1986, dawned with the fury of a Gulf Coast winter storm. Hurricane season had passed, but this weather system packed nearly as much punch: 60-mile-per-hour winds, driving rain, and a storm surge that pushed the tide a full 100 yards beyond its normal reach. Donovan Riley wasn't supposed to be on the beach that morning. At 62, the veteran fisherman normally stayed home during such weather, but his grandson's birthday was approaching, and money was tight. If he could catch enough blue crab to sell to the restaurants in Biloxi, he might afford the bicycle his grandson coveted. The storm had largely passed by sunrise, leaving behind a transformed coastline. Donovan walked the beach not with crab traps, but with a burlap sack, collecting debris that might have value: bottles, cans, driftwood that could be sold to crafters. The tide was receding, revealing treasures and trash that had been dragged from the ocean floor. Near an outcropping of rocks rarely visible, except at the lowest tides, something caught his eye. A rectangular shape, half buried in wet sand. At first he thought it might be a jewelry box, something valuable washed up from a shipwreck or lost by a careless tourist. But as he brushed away the sand, he recognized the unmistakable form of a book. "When I picked it up, I knew it was a Bible right away," Donovan later testified. "My hands started shaking because the leather felt expensive, like something important. And when I opened it up and saw her name, Lord have mercy, I nearly dropped it right back in that sand." The Bible was in remarkable condition considering its apparent journey. The leather cover showed water damage and salt erosion, but the gilded page edges had protected much of the interior. Most surprisingly, the Bible had fallen open to Psalm 31, with one passage clearly underlined in black ink: "My times are in your hands. Deliver me from the hands of my enemies, from those who pursue me." Donovan didn't touch anything further. Despite the cold and his wet clothes, He sat on the beach beside the Bible for nearly an hour, keeping watch over it, while he waited for the police to arrive. Detective Sandra Michaels was the first officer on scene, arriving with evidence collection equipment and a camera. She photographed the Bible in situ before carefully placing it in an evidence bag. The location was precisely documented, 1.7 miles south of Cedar Bay's main pier, on a stretch of beach locally known as Driftwood Point, due to the amount of debris that regularly washed ashore there. The Bible itself was a standard King James Version, but its craftsmanship set it apart from mass-produced editions. The cover was genuine leather, not bonded or synthetic. Gold lettering spelled out Holy Bible on the spine, though some letters had been worn away by water and sand. The page edges were gilded in gold. Inside the front cover, written in neat script, was, "To Amara, may God's word light your path always. Love, Mama." Christmas, 1976. Forensic analysis revealed several critical details. First, the Bible had not been in the water for the full 3 months of Amara's disappearance. Marine biologists estimated exposure to salt water at 3 to 4 weeks maximum, based on the pattern of deterioration. Second, sand embedded in the binding matched the mineral composition of Cedar Bay's beaches, not offshore sand deposits. This suggested the Bible had been buried in the beach, not carried in by the tide. Third, and most disturbingly, a partial fingerprint was found on the inside cover. It was smudged and degraded, but preserved enough to determine it did not match Amara's prints on file from her driver's license application. The print was never identified. Most telling was the underlined passage in Psalm 31. Handwriting analysis confirmed the underlining was made with Amara's distinctive style. She always used a ruler to make perfectly straight lines under Scripture, a habit noted by many congregation members. "That's the part that keeps me up at night," Detective Michaels admitted years later in a rare interview. If she underlined that passage, she knew she was in danger. She was being pursued by someone, and we failed to protect her. For Amara's congregation, the Bible's discovery was both a wound and a balm. It confirmed their worst fears, that something sinister had happened to their pastor. But it also provided a tangible connection to her, proof that she hadn't simply abandoned them, as some had suggested. "That Bible was her mother's gift," said Thomas Garner, tears welling in his eyes as he spoke to reporters. "She carried it everywhere except the pulpit, where she used her teaching Bible. It was her most precious possession. She would never willingly part with it." The Bible took on almost mystical significance in Cedar Bay. For a community steeped in faith, its discovery couldn't be mere coincidence. Some saw it as Amara's final sermon, a message to persevere in the face of evil. Others interpreted it as divine intervention, God's way of ensuring the case wouldn't be forgotten. Louise Bryant organized a prayer vigil the night after the Bible was found. Over 300 people attended, spilling out of the church and into the parking lot. They sang hymns, shared memories of Amara, and read from Psalm 31. The atmosphere was solemn, but charged with purpose. "This isn't over," Louise declared, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Someone wants us to believe Pastor Amara is gone forever. But as long as we remember her, as long as we continue her work, she's still here. And we won't rest until we know what happened to her." The national media, which had briefly covered Amara's disappearance before moving on to other stories, returned to Cedar Bay in force. Network news vans lined the main street. Reporters interviewed anyone who would speak to them. The Bible discovery made front-page headlines across the country. Time magazine ran a cover story titled, "Buried Truth, the Pastor, the Bible, and a Town's Secrets." The article positioned Amara's case within the larger context of civil rights struggles in the South, suggesting her disappearance was potentially linked to her activism. The renewed attention forced Cedar Bay police to reopen the active investigation. Chief Harper, under intense scrutiny, requested assistance from the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. The FBI declined to become involved, stating the case didn't meet criteria for federal intervention despite growing suspicions of civil rights violations. As December turned to January, the Bible remained the only physical evidence in Amara's disappearance, but its discovery had shifted the investigation's focus dramatically, from whether Amara had left voluntarily to who might have wanted to silence her permanently. And in Cedar Bay, whispers began to circulate about who had the most to gain from Pastor Amara Bell's disappearance. To understand Cedar Bay in 1986 is to understand a town in reluctant transition. On paper, segregation had ended decades earlier. In reality, invisible lines still divided the community as surely as if they'd been drawn on maps. The eastern side of town, with its view of the Gulf and carefully maintained beach access, remained almost exclusively white and affluent. The western side, where factories and fishing operations provided most employment opportunities, was predominantly black and working class. The railroad tracks bisecting Cedar Bay served as the unspoken boundary between these worlds. Economic power rested firmly with a handful of families who had controlled Cedar Bay since before the Civil War. Chief among them were the Whitfields, who had transitioned from plantation owners to industrialists over generations. In 1986, Richard Whitfield served as mayor, the third in his family to hold the position. The Prescotts, related to the Whitfields through marriage, dominated the construction and real estate markets. Warren Prescott, brother-in-law to Mayor Whitfield, had built most of the new developments in Cedar Bay over the previous decade. The Hollisters owned the fishing fleet and processing plant that employed nearly 30% of Cedar Bay's workforce. Their political contributions ensured favorable regulations and tax treatment. These families, along with a few others, comprised what locals called the Foundation, a semi-formal coalition that made decisions about Cedar Bay's development long before issues reached the town council. "You have to understand what Pastor Amara was up against," explained Ronald Davis, a civil rights attorney who consulted on the case in 1987. Cedar Bay wasn't just a town with racial tensions. It was essentially a modern feudal system. The Foundation families owned the businesses that provided jobs, the banks that approved loans, the real estate companies that decided who could live where. They controlled every aspect of life. Into this environment came Amara Bell, educated, charismatic, and unwilling to accept the status quo. From the moment she established her ministry in Cedar Bay, she represented a challenge to the established order. Most black churches in towns like Cedar Bay kept to themselves, Davis continued. They focused on spiritual matters and supporting their immediate community. Pastor Amara did that too, but she went further. She asked why her congregation members couldn't get home loans, why the western side schools received less funding, why black teenagers were arrested at 5 times the rate of white teenagers. Amara's opposition came from multiple directions, some more overt than others. Most visible was Reverend Clayton Monroe of First Baptist Church, Cedar Bay's largest and wealthiest congregation. Monroe, a close ally of Mayor Whitfield, frequently denounced Amara from his pulpit as a false prophet and a wolf in sheep's clothing. He particularly objected to her ordination as a pastor. "The Bible is clear that women should not have authority over men in spiritual matters," Monroe told the Cedar Bay Gazette in 1985. Ms. Bell's so-called ministry is an affront to scripture and tradition. Behind Monroe stood several business leaders who objected to Amara's economic justice campaigns. When she organized a boycott of stores that refused to hire black cashiers, the Chamber of Commerce issued a statement condemning her for creating division and harming local businesses. The Jefferson Hotel project, however, created her most dangerous enemies. The building, constructed in 1910 as a luxury hotel for wealthy vacationers, had fallen into disrepair by the 1970s. It stood on prime real estate, a full block at the edge of downtown, with views of both the Gulf and the Bay that gave the town its name. The city had acquired it through tax foreclosure in 1982. What Amara didn't know when she proposed converting it into a women's shelter was that Warren Prescott had already created architectural plans for Jefferson Place, a mixed-use development with luxury condominiums, high-end retail, and a marina. The project would have been the largest development in Cedar Bay's history, worth millions in construction contracts and real estate sales. Mayor Whitfield had promised his brother-in-law that the property would be his. The council's decision to lease it to Amara's church instead represented not just a moral defeat, but a significant financial loss. 3 weeks before Amara's disappearance, an anonymous source leaked documents to her showing the Jefferson Place plans, complete with signatures from 4 council members, the same 4 who had initially opposed her shelter proposal before Councilman Foster cast the deciding vote in her favor. "She came to my office with those papers," recalled Attorney Davis. "She was furious, but not surprised. She asked about her legal options and whether the lease could be invalidated. I told her it was legally binding as long as she met the terms, but that she should be careful. These were powerful people who weren't accustomed to losing." Amara didn't back down. Instead, she accelerated the shelter plans, recruiting volunteers to begin renovations immediately, rather than waiting until spring as originally scheduled. The threats intensified. Beyond the slashed tires and broken windows, Amara received anonymous calls describing her daily routine in detail: what time she left home, where she shopped, which route she took to the church. The implication was clear: someone was watching her. 1 week before she vanished, Amara reported finding a dead blackbird on her front porch, its wings arranged in a crucifix position. Officer Benjamin Drake dismissed it as probably just kids playing a prank. Most disturbing was a letter Amara received 3 days before her disappearance. Found in her desk drawer during the investigation, it contained a single sentence: "Jezebel was thrown down, and the dogs ate her flesh." The biblical reference to a queen who was murdered and whose body was desecrated was unmistakably a threat. Detective Michaels attempted to have the letter analyzed for fingerprints and handwriting comparison, but Chief Harper denied the request, calling it a waste of resources on what's probably just a disturbed religious fanatic. As the investigation into Amara's disappearance stalled through October and November, one voice unexpectedly broke the silence. Mary Ann Hollister, daughter of fishing magnate George Hollister and a recent college graduate, approached Detective Michaels with information she'd overheard at a family dinner. She was terrified, Michaels noted in her personal case files, which were made public years later. She said her father, Warren Prescott, and Mayor Whitfield had been drinking after dinner about a week before Pastor Bell disappeared. She overheard Prescott saying, "That Bell woman is becoming a real problem." The mayor reportedly answered, "Problems can be solved." Then they noticed her and changed the subject. Mary Ann couldn't offer more concrete evidence, and her statement alone wasn't enough to justify interrogating Cedar Bay's most powerful men. Detective Michaels noted the information, but didn't include it in the official case file. After the Bible was discovered, Mary Ann attempted to come forward publicly with her story. The day before her scheduled interview with a reporter from the Jackson Clarion-Ledger, she was involved in a single-car accident on Highway 90. She survived but suffered a traumatic brain injury that affected her memory. The interview never took place. The discovery of Amara's Bible in December 1986 forced a recalibration of the entire investigation. What had been treated as a missing person case with undertones of voluntary departure now carried the weight of potential homicide. With pressure mounting from national media and civil rights organizations, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation assigned Agent Raymond Norris to assist local law enforcement. Norris, a veteran investigator with experience in civil rights cases, brought fresh perspective and resources to Cedar Bay. His first action was to re-examine evidence that had been overlooked or dismissed in the initial investigation. The broken window at Amara's home, originally attributed to vandalism, was reassessed as a possible entry point. Glass fragments were collected for laboratory analysis, something not done in September. The keys left in Amara's car, which police had interpreted as signs of carelessness or haste, were now viewed as potential evidence that she had intended to return to the vehicle. Fingerprint analysis revealed smudged prints on the driver's door that didn't match Amara's, prints that had never been processed during the original investigation. Most significantly, Agent Norris ordered a thorough search of the area where the Bible was found. For 3 days in January 1987, officers combed the beach and adjacent wooded areas. Their efforts yielded a surprising discovery: a woman's shoe buried approximately 50 yards from where the Bible had been found. The shoe, a black leather pump in size 7, was positively identified by Louise Bryant as belonging to Amara. She had worn such shoes only for church services and special occasions, not for everyday activities. Finding that shoe changed everything, Agent Norris later wrote in his case summary. It established a potential crime scene and gave us a starting point for reconstructing what might have happened to Pastor Bell. Soil samples from inside the shoe contained traces of industrial chemicals not normally found on Cedar Bay's beaches. Analysis matched the chemical signature to products used at the Hollister seafood processing plant. When investigators attempted to search the processing plant, they encountered immediate resistance. George Hollister refused entry without a warrant, and Judge William Kessler, a longtime friend of the Hollister family, initially denied the warrant request, citing insufficient probable cause. It took intervention from the State Attorney General's office to secure the necessary legal permissions. By the time investigators gained access to the plant in late January, it had been thoroughly cleaned. No evidence was found. The search for Amara expanded to include waterways and remote areas around Cedar Bay. Cadaver dogs were brought in from Jackson, working through dense woods and swampland. Though several potential sites were identified, no human remains were discovered. As the physical investigation progressed, Agent Norris developed a profile of the most likely perpetrator. Based on evidence and victimology, he concluded, the subject is likely a white male between 30 and 50 years of age, with significant connections to Cedar Bay's power structure. He is comfortable with authority and accustomed to having his orders followed without question. The crime was premeditated and executed with precision, suggesting planning and resources. The burial of the Bible months after the disappearance indicates a psychological need to maintain connection to the crime while demonstrating power over the victim and the investigation. This profile pointed toward the town's elite, particularly those with connections to the Jefferson Hotel project. Warren Prescott emerged as the primary person of interest. Prescott, 47 in 1986, had built his construction empire through connections and intimidation. Former employees described him as charming in public but ruthless in private. His company had faced multiple lawsuits alleging racial discrimination in hiring practices, lawsuits that mysteriously disappeared from court dockets before reaching trial. Warren Prescott was the kind of man who never directly threatened anyone, said former employee Thomas Kirkland. He didn't have to. He'd just smile and say, "It would be a shame if something happened to your job or your house or your family," and things would happen to people who crossed him. Prescott's alibi for September 15th, the day Amara disappeared, was provided by Mayor Whitfield. The two men claimed to have been golfing at the Cedar Bay Country Club from 2 p.m. until dusk. Club records confirmed they had reserved a tee time, but no employees specifically remembered seeing them on the course that afternoon. When Agent Norris attempted to interview Prescott, He was met with a wall of legal obstacles. Prescott's attorney, hired from a prestigious Jackson law firm, submitted a statement declaring his client had no information relevant to the investigation and would not submit to questioning without a formal subpoena. The attorney further warned that any attempt to harass an upstanding citizen based on rumor and conjecture would result in legal action against the department. Chief Harper, increasingly uncomfortable with the investigation's direction, began restricting Detective Michaels' activities and limiting her access to Agent Norris. When she protested, she was assigned to desk duty, effectively removing her from the case. The investigation had uncovered compelling circumstantial evidence, but no smoking gun. No witness had come forward claiming to have seen Amara being abducted or harmed. No confession had been made. Her body had not been found. Without these elements, building a criminal case against anyone, especially someone with Prescott's resources and connections, remained virtually impossible. The renewed investigation also deepened divisions within Cedar Bay. The black community, along with some white allies, demanded justice and accountability. They organized weekly marches through downtown, carrying signs with Amara's photo and quotes from her sermons. Many white residents, particularly those with economic ties to the Foundation families, resented the attention and disruption. Letters to the editor complained about outsiders stirring up trouble and dwelling on the past instead of moving forward. Some businesses displayed signs supporting the investigation. Others banned protesters from their establishments. Friendships fractured along racial and political lines. Children were kept home from school to avoid confrontations. Cedar Bay police reported a 40% increase in assault cases in the first quarter of 1987. Most incidents involved arguments that escalated into violence when Amara's case was mentioned. "The town is like a powder keg," Agent Norris wrote in his field notes. "Everyone has chosen a side, and no one is willing to listen to the other. The truth about Pastor Bell's disappearance lies somewhere in this divided community, but fear and loyalty are keeping it buried." By March 1987, the active investigation again began to slow. Agent Norris was reassigned to other cases, though he continued to consult on Amara's disappearance. Detective Michaels resigned from the Cedar Bay Police Department, citing irreconcilable differences with leadership. The Bible and shoe remained in evidence storage, silent witnesses to whatever had happened on that September day. And Cedar Bay continued its uneasy existence, a town unified in geography but divided in almost every other way. What do you think happened to Pastor Amara? Share your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more unsolved mysteries. Your engagement helps us continue investigating these forgotten cases. Over the decades since Pastor Amara Bell vanished, numerous theories have emerged about her fate. Some are based on evidence and investigation. Others spring from rumor and speculation. What follows are the most credible scenarios, assessed by cold case experts who have reviewed the available information. Theory 1. Targeted elimination due to activism. The most widely accepted theory among civil rights organizations and many law enforcement professionals is that Amara was deliberately killed to stop her activism, particularly her work on the Jefferson Hotel Shelter Project. This theory is supported by the documented threats Amara received, the financial interests threatened by her work, and the pattern of intimidation against black community leaders throughout the South during this period. Retired FBI agent Carolyn Hewitt, who specialized in civil rights cold cases, believes this scenario is most consistent with the evidence. When you look at similar cases from the 1960s through the 1980s, you see a pattern. Community leaders who challenged economic power structures often faced escalating threats, followed by violence if they refused to back down. Pastor Bell fits this pattern perfectly. Under this theory, Warren Prescott is the most likely orchestrator, possibly with knowledge from Mayor Whitfield and others, connected to the Jefferson Place development. Prescott had the motive, millions in potential profits; the means, access to private property where a crime could be committed; and a documented history of threatening those who interfered with his business interests. The deliberate placement of the Bible, months after the disappearance, aligns with what criminologists call signature behavior, actions taken by a perpetrator to communicate power or control beyond what was necessary to commit the crime itself. "Whoever buried that Bible wanted to send a message," said Hewitt. "They were saying, 'I'm still here, still in control, and smart enough not to get caught.' It's a form of taunting both law enforcement and the community." Theory 2. Personal vendetta, related to church leadership. A second theory focuses on religious opposition to Amara's role as a female pastor and her progressive theology. In this scenario, her elimination was motivated not by economics, but by religious fundamentalism. Reverend Clayton Monroe's public condemnation of Amara created an environment where violence against her could be justified in the minds of extremists. The biblical reference in the threatening letter, comparing Amara to Jezebel, suggests religious motivation. Religious hatred can be just as deadly as economic or racial motivation, noted Dr. Teresa Wilson, who studies violence against women in leadership positions. When someone believes they're acting as God's instrument to punish heresy, they can justify almost any action. Under this theory, the perpetrator might have been someone from within Cedar Bay's religious community, possibly connected to First Baptist Church or similar conservative congregations. The Bible's placement could represent a twisted form of religious ritual, returning her false teaching to the elements. This theory is supported by the timing of Amara's disappearance just before a church service, a symbolic moment that would resonate with someone motivated by religious objections to her ministry. However, it lacks the clear motive and means established in the first theory. While religious opposition to Amara was real and documented, it's less clear who would have translated that opposition into violent action. Theory 3. Connection to larger pattern of crimes. A third theory places Amara's disappearance within a broader context of violence against Black community leaders throughout the South. Under this scenario, her case was not isolated, but part of a coordinated effort to suppress civil rights activism. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, numerous Black activists, journalists, and religious leaders across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia reported harassment, vandalism, and threats. Some disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances that were never fully investigated. These weren't random incidents, explained civil rights historian Dr. Marcus Johnson. There's substantial evidence suggesting an organized network dedicated to preserving white economic and political power in the South. They operated in the shadows, often with tacit protection from local law enforcement. Under this theory, Amara's activism had drawn attention from groups beyond Cedar Bay, possibly including remnants of organizations like the White Citizens Council, which had evolved from open racism to more subtle forms of opposition to civil rights. The difficulty with this theory is its lack of specific evidence connecting Amara to wider networks of violence. While patterns exist across cases, no documentary evidence has emerged linking her disappearance to organized groups outside Cedar Bay. Criminal profiler Dr. Elaine Carpenter, who reviewed the case in 2010, offered this assessment. Based on victimology, crime scene analysis, and behavioral evidence, I believe Pastor Bell's disappearance was most likely perpetrated by someone with local knowledge, personal motivation, and resources to both commit the crime and evade detection. The burial of the Bible months later suggests someone still present in the community, monitoring the investigation, and confident enough to revisit a location connected to the crime. The most compelling evidence points to a perpetrator with economic motivation, social status that placed them above suspicion and connections that protected them from thorough investigation. In my professional opinion, Warren Prescott remains the most viable suspect, though without physical evidence linking him directly to the crime. Legal prosecution would be extremely difficult. The strongest indicators pointing to Prescott include his clear financial motive, his documented opposition to Amara's shelter project, his access to locations where evidence was found, and the protection he received from local officials during the investigation. The chemical traces in Amara's shoe, matching those used at the Hollister processing plant, a facility with business ties to Prescott Construction, provide the closest thing to physical evidence in the case. However, without Amara's remains, without witness testimony directly implicating Prescott, and without forensic evidence placing him at a crime scene, the case against him remains circumstantial, compelling, but legally insufficient. In the years following Amara's disappearance, Cedar Bay Community Church struggled to maintain its ministry. Without Amara's leadership, attendance declined. Some members, fearful that whatever happened to Amara might happen to them, stopped coming altogether. Others found the memories too painful. For nearly a year, the pulpit remained empty. Visiting pastors delivered Sunday sermons, but none stayed permanently. The church board, led by Thomas Garner and Louise Bryant, kept basic operations running while searching for someone who could continue Amara's work. In September 1987, on the first anniversary of Amara's disappearance, the church held a memorial service. Over 500 people attended, including representatives from churches across the South and civil rights organizations from across the country. During that service, Deacon Garner announced that the church would be renamed Amara Bell Memorial Church. More significantly, he introduced Reverend Monique Taylor, a young seminary graduate who had been mentored by Amara during her college years. Pastor Amara believed the work was always more important than the worker, Garner told the congregation. She would want us to continue, to build on her foundation, rather than mourn among its ruins. Under Reverend Taylor's leadership, the church gradually rebuilt its membership and influence. The Jefferson Hotel Shelter Project, delayed but not abandoned, was completed in 1988. Named Belle Haven, it provided emergency housing and support services for women and children escaping domestic violence. Cedar Bay itself underwent subtle but significant changes in the decades following Amara's disappearance. The case had exposed the town's deep divisions and power imbalances in ways that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. In 1988, a coalition of black churches and community organizations formed the Cedar Bay Equity Council, dedicated to addressing systemic racism in housing, education, and employment. They used strategies Amara had developed: economic pressure, voter registration, and public accountability for officials. Their first victory came in 1989 when 3 new members were elected to the town council, creating the first black majority in Cedar Bay's history. Their first official act was to establish a scholarship fund in Amara's name for local students pursuing careers in ministry or social work. Warren Prescott's influence diminished in the years following the investigation. Though never charged with any crime, the cloud of suspicion affected his business. Several major clients canceled contracts, citing public relations concerns. In 1992, he relocated to Florida, selling most of his Cedar Bay properties at significant losses. Mayor Whitfield lost his re-election bid in 1990 to Councilman Reginald Foster, who had cast the deciding vote in favor of Amara's shelter project. Foster served 3 terms, overseeing the gradual integration of Cedar Bay's public facilities and services. For Amara's family, her elderly mother in Jackson, her younger sister in Chicago, the pain of her unresolved disappearance never faded. Josephine Bell, who had given Amara the Bible found on the beach, died in 1995, still waiting for answers about her daughter's fate. "My mother never gave up hope," said Corinne Bell, Amara's sister. Every time the phone rang, even years later, she'd think it might be news about Amara. She kept a bag packed in case she needed to travel to bring her daughter home. Corinne continued her sister's legacy in different ways, establishing a foundation that supported Black women entering ministry. The Amara Bell Foundation provided scholarships, mentoring, and legal assistance to women facing discrimination in religious institutions. Amara would be amazed to see how many women now lead congregations across the country, Corinne said in a 2010 interview. She wasn't fighting just for herself, but for all the women who would come after her. The investigation into Amara's disappearance never officially closed. It remained categorized as an open cold case, assigned to a succession of detectives over the decades. Periodically, new technologies or methodologies would prompt re-examination of the limited physical evidence. In 2001, advances in DNA analysis allowed for testing of skin cells found on the inside cover of Amara's Bible. The results excluded Amara herself, but couldn't be matched to any suspect. The partial fingerprint, digitally enhanced with technology unavailable in 1986, still didn't match any prints in law enforcement databases. In 2015, the Mississippi Cold Case Unit conducted ground-penetrating radar searches in several locations associated with the case, including the beach where the Bible was found and property formerly owned by Warren Prescott. No human remains were discovered. Detective Sandra Michaels, who had resigned from Cedar Bay Police in 1987, became a private investigator specializing in missing persons cases. Until her death in 2020, she continued to investigate Amara's disappearance independently, following leads and interviewing witnesses long after official efforts had waned. "I made a promise to myself and to Pastor Bell," Michael said in her final interview. "I promised I wouldn't stop looking until she was found. I've kept half that promise." Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Amara's legacy was symbolic, the Bible itself. Preserved in an evidence locker for years, it was finally released to Corinne Bell in 2010 after authorities concluded that no further forensic testing would yield results. Corinne donated it to the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, where it remains on display alongside other artifacts from the state's complex history of struggle and resilience. The exhibit, titled "Buried Not Forgotten," places Amara's story in the context of other civil rights figures whose work was cut short by violence, but whose impact continued long after they were gone. The underlined passage from Psalm 31, "My times are in your hands, deliver me from the hands of my enemies, from those who pursue me," became a rallying cry for those continuing Amara's work. The words appeared on T-shirts, protest signs, and social media campaigns focused on justice for Black victims of unsolved crimes. In Cedar Bay today, Pastor Amara Bell is remembered in numerous ways. A mural depicting her stands on the side of the renamed Amara Bell Memorial Church. The community center attached to Bellhaven Shelter bears her name. Each September 15th, residents gather for a prayer walk that traces her last known movements through town. For many, especially in the Black community, Amara's unsolved disappearance remains an open wound, a reminder that justice has been delayed, perhaps permanently denied. For others, her legacy represents the possibility of transformation, even in communities with deeply entrenched divisions. As one longtime Cedar Bay resident put it, "Pastor Amara may have disappeared, but what she stood for never did. This town is different because she was here, and it's different because of how we responded when she was taken from us. Some responded with silence and protection of the status quo, others with demands for justice and change. The struggle between those forces continues today, just as it did in 1986. The question of what happened to Pastor Amara Bell may never be fully answered, but the impact of her life, her work, and even her disappearance continues to ripple through Cedar Bay and beyond. A testament to how a single voice raised against injustice can echo long after it has been silenced. This story deserves to be remembered. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell to join our community uncovering forgotten mysteries. Until next time, I'm with Last Seen Stories.